Hello everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, the warning against idolatry. So, here we go. I would not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, and they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now, let's just make this clear because it can be very confusing, like a drinking from a rock and baptising into a cloud. What on earth's going on here? If you haven't read the Old Testament to any degree, then you won't have a clue what is going on here and what Paul is talking about. Okay, so I'm just going to break it down to very simple, in a nutshell. Okay, what he's talking about here: baptized through the sea represents the children of Israel going through the Red Sea. Okay, when the seas were parted and they went through it. Okay, it's referring to that. Under the cloud, when the children of Israel were going through the wilderness, as God led them, he would lead them by a column of fire by night, like a pillar of fire column, and a pillar or column of cloud by day. Okay, and so that's what that's referring to. It says in verse 3 about eating the same spiritual food, drinking the same spiritual drink, which is Christ. Now this is all symbolic. Obviously there wasn't a little rock jumping about and people were drinking and eating from it, you know what I mean? I just had to be silly for a minute just to point out a point. This was symbolic. Jesus is referred to as the rock many times through the Old Testament, and also Jesus said, upon this rock I will build my church. So the rock is referred to is symbolically of Christ, being something firm, strong foundation. And it goes on to say in verse 5, but with many of them God was not well pleased, and they were overthrown in the wilderness. This represents the disobedience of the Jews and the children of Israel through the Old Testament, where they were disobeying God, and God allowed judgment to come upon them. They were messing about, playing about with sin, and so God was not pleased with that. And so therefore many of them fell in the wilderness and suffered various judgments. Verse 4. Now these things were our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things, as they lusted, neither be idolaters or worshippers of idols, as some of them were, as some of them even. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel, or to have wild parties. Neither let us commit sexual immorality, as some of them committed, when 23,000 fell in one day. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed by serpents. Neither murmur, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Again, we've got to look back at the Old Testament to see what is going on here. A casual reading of this text here will just leave you in outer space. It just doesn't seem to make any sense. So if we read it with the lens of the Old Testament here, it says in verse 6, now these things were our examples, and the intention is that we should not lust after evil things as they did. What was written here, the following verses, about people committing sin and then being judged and falling in the wilderness, these warnings are for us today, and the example was set by the Jews, by the children of Israel. So it's like Paul saying, think back on the children of Israel. Think back on the Jews. What did they do? They committed idolatry. They committed fornication. They were into all kinds of sins. And now we have an example set before us that we don't want to follow their example. Okay? We don't want to follow that example because we're going to end up coming under the judgment of God. Okay? It says... let's move down to verse 11. Now, just before verse 11, it says about the serpents that were destroying the children of Israel. There were fiery serpents that were biting the Jews. Various other catastrophes and judgments coming upon them. Neither murmur, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Or in other words, complaining and moaning and whinging about it. Verse 11, now all these things happen to them for examples. They are written as an admonition or as encouragement or an urging to us, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed or pay attention, lest he falls. No temptation has taken you except what is common to man. God is faithful, and he will not permit you to be tempted above what you can endure, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. Now a famous verse is coming up in verse 13. Just before we get there, it mentions these things are examples. The Old Testament, what happened there, are examples to us to bring us encouragement and to urge us to do the right thing by God. As we go to verse 12, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Some people can get very puffed up in arrogance and in pride and think that they're uber Christian, you know. They're sort of like, oh yeah, I'm reading my Bible, I'm praying, I'm going to church, and I'm living for God and doing all the rest of it. That's great. Keep doing that. But sometimes we can miss it and begin to go works-based, or begin to think that we're above other people. It's especially very easy to fall into that trap when, if you're a very spiritually minded Christian and God has used you in the gifts of the Spirit, for example, and used you in ways that are, you know, amazing, it can go to your head. Okay, when I first become a Christian, I got among Pentecostal church. I would see some of the Pentecostals that God would use them in the gifts of the Spirit, and I was like, wow. And they seem to have a very strong knowledge of certain aspects of the Bible. And then I'd go amongst, say, the Baptists, for example, or some of the more traditional churches, and I would see that people were not speaking in tongues, perhaps, or they weren't praying for the sick, and there wasn't any gifts of the Spirit operating, and there was no teaching on them subjects at all. But there was very good teachings on other subjects. And being around that kind of a circle, you tend to find other people saying, oh, well, these traditional churches, these non-Pentecostal churches or charismatic, they're weak. They're just dead churches. Their traditions have pulled them down. And in some cases that may be true. But that doesn't mean that we should breed elitism in our churches and think, well, I'm Pentecostal, so I'm automatically better than the Baptist or the Church of England, okay? Because it doesn't work that way. It just means that the Pentecostals got more knowledge in one area, but then if you go to the Baptist, you'll find that they've got more knowledge in another area. So really, we all need to get together and not be divided. But what comes out of that is elitism, okay? Thinking that you're better. And so take heed. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed or pay attention lest he fall. Always keep humble. Now it goes on to say that one of the most famous verses that we hear, no temptation has taken you except that which is common to man. Wherever temptation's out there, there is a man on earth that has been tempted by it. Jesus was tempted in all areas, yet without sin. There are some things that are not temptations, they are abominations or iniquity, which Jesus would not have been tempted by. Okay, unnatural sins, he would not have been tempted by. He would have been tempted by anger and all, you know, the works of the flesh. He would have got tempted in them areas, perhaps. But he would not have got tempted in homosexuality, okay, because that is not a natural lust of the flesh. Okay, it's not in Galatians chapter 5. Okay, it doesn't mention that as a temptation or work of the flesh. Okay, that's separate. So he wouldn't have been tempted he wouldn't have been tempted to kill children. He wouldn't have been tempted with paedophilia. He wouldn't have been tempted to do all these unnatural sins. Do you get me? Unnatural. It's natural to lust after things. It's natural to be greedy. Natural to lie. To want to kill someone. To put something else in God's place. All these things, they're classed as natural. But other things that I've mentioned by name, not natural. Okay. That's called iniquity, which means translated wickedness, which is iniquity means to twist something, to twist it. So it's twisted thinking. God is faithful, so no temptation has taken you except what is common to man. God is faithful, and he will not permit you to be tempted above what you can endure, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. Now, it doesn't say that God won't allow us to go through something that we can't handle, because typically speaking, he will lead us into a situation that we in our flesh and minds cannot conquer, that we cannot overcome. And then he'll say, you'll come to the end of yourself and say, God, I can't do it. I'm out of strength. And he'll go, that's fine, because in your weakness, my strength is made perfect. Now you need me to help you get through this. Are you with me? So if you're in a situation, a temptation, a trial or test, God will allow you to be tempted beyond your strength so that you call upon him and he will help you through it. But notice that with the temptation, it says he will make a way of escape. Okay? In other words, he'll show you how to get out of it. If you're being tempted with sexual sin, he will say the way out of it is don't go to that person's house that is causing you to fall into that. The way of escape is not to put that video in your VCR or DVD, or do not go on the internet, okay, in regard to those particular things. He's given you a way out. There's no excuse, okay, there's no excuse for it. If you say, oh, I'm weak, well, okay, you're weak, but God has made a way out, so just don't do it, okay? Go out the exit stage right, as they say. Verse 14, so my beloved, flee, run from idolatry. I speak as to wise men. Judge for yourselves what I say. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? The bread which we break, is it not the communion of the body of Christ? For we being many are one bread and one body. We are all partakers or sharers of that one bread. Consider Israel after the flesh. Now think about the Jews. Are not those who eat of the sacrifices partakers or sharers of the altar? What am I saying then? That the idol is anything, or that which is offered in sacrifice to idols is anything? But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. I do not want you to have fellowship or association, relationship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot be partakers or sharers of the Lord's table and of the table of demons. Do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? So he's talking about drinking a fake communion in honour of demons. Okay, because when people worship idols, they are worshipping the demon behind the idol. Okay, now an idol is nothing in itself, as it says in the New Testament. It's just a piece of rock. It's a piece of wood or ivory or whatever. But when a person begins to worship it and begins to invoke the powers of darkness and invoke demonic names, then that idol then becomes demonic, and then doing communion to an idol then becomes the table of the devil. Okay, the drink of devils, the table of the devils. So, do all to the glory of God, verse 23. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify or build up. Let no one seek his own, but to each one the other's well-being. In other words, put other people first. Don't just do what you want to do. Do what someone else may want to do. Don't just look for your own personal benefit or success. Look for the success of another person. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. There are some things that we can say, well, it's not a sin to do this, it's not a sin to do that, but is it helpful? It might not be sin, but is it actually helpful? There's many things I could think of, like, that's not a sin, but it's actually helpful. Sometimes in giving advice to a person, we can give advice that isn't sinful, but it might not be helpful. It might be a bit patronising. It might be, did you really need to say that? You know, did you really need to sort of come across like that and put salt in the wound or kick me while I'm down? No. Verse 25, eat whatever is sold in the meat market, asking no question for the sake of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. If any of those who do not believe invite you to a feast, and you desire to go, eat whatever is set before you, asking no question, for the sake of conscience. But if anyone says to you, this was offered in sacrifice to idols, do not eat it for the sake of him that mentioned it, and for the sake of the conscience, for the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Confidence, I say, not your own, but that of the other. For why is my liberty or freedom judged by another man's conscience? If I partake or share with thankfulness, why am I slandered concerning that for which I give thanks? Therefore, whether you eat or drink, or whatever you do it all to the glory of God. Give no offence, neither to the Jews, nor to the Gentiles, nor to the church of God. Just as I try to please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit or benefit, but for the benefit or profit of many, that they may be saved. That's a pretty long chapter there. There was quite a lot to unpack into, to go into the details. As I've said before in my other videos, I could just read this in 5 minutes, but you'd be none the wiser. We need to, with Bible study, these are Bible studies basically, not just devotionals. It is important for me to walk away from this video and say, have I really done my best to explain what is going on, and for all those who watch these videos to come away thinking, not only did I get to read my chapter of the Bible for the day, if you sort of read one chapter a day, which is quite common, okay, but you come away with an understanding. And that's what we need to do. We need to read the Bible to understand, not to read the Bible just to read it, not just to say, well, I've read my chapter, off I go, done my deed for the day, I'm proving I'm good with God. No, we need to walk away and say, did I understand that? And if I didn't understand it, do I need to go back over it and look at things? As people have often said, the Bible, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeded from the mouth of God. Matthew 4 verse 4. The word of God is like food, it's like bread. You shouldn't swallow your food in one go, in one gulp. You should chew it. Keep chewing it and receiving the nourishment and the nutrients from it and all the benefits of it. Then you swallow it once you've chewed it enough. Okay? And that's coming from a nutritionist point of view. Well, God bless you. Thanks for joining me. And I hope that you got a lot out today. I certainly did myself. As I read these, I'm receiving just as much as you are as well. I'm just God's newsboy. God bless you all. Thank you. And please subscribe to the channel. Leave a like or dislike, a comment. And feel free to share this video. God bless you in Jesus' mighty name. Bye-bye.